In 2019, Angus Taylor used a forged document to smear a political opponent, and then misled Parliament about it. Angus Taylor is the Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction in the Morrison Government. And even though he's been involved in scandal after scandal, he somehow keeps escaping accountability.
This has been considered and closed by 2 independent police forces.
Let's see if that's really what happened. In June 2019, the City of Sydney declared a climate emergency. As part of the resolution, the Council called on the federal government to take urgent action on emissions reduction. And the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore, committed to writing a letter to various politicians to express the Council's view. One of these letters would go to Susan Lee, the Federal Environment Minister, but she never responded. Instead, the letter was forwarded on to Angus Taylor, the Minister for Emissions Reduction. 1 month later, in September 2019, Angus Taylor responded with a letter he must have thought was really clever. It was deliberately designed to portray Clover Moore as a hypocrite. It started off with the usual nonsense about what the government has been doing in terms of emissions reduction, but then at the end, he wrote, "You might be interested to know that there are many practical ways local councils can take real and meaningful action to reduce their carbon emissions. One such example is to limit unnecessary air travel." He then said the council's annual report showed spending of $1.7 million on international travel and $14.2 million on domestic travel, and that the council can cut travel to make a meaningful contribution to emissions reduction. That's a huge amount of travel spending. Before Clover Moore had even seen the letter for herself, Angus Taylor had also leaked it to the Daily Telegraph to run a smear article the very next day. There was only one problem with all of this. The numbers in Angus Taylor's letter were based off a forged document that he provided as his source. Here is the real annual report. The real figures showed travel costs by councillors came to less than $6,000, a tiny fraction of the fake figures of $15 million. But before we keep going, you might be wondering, what's the big deal with fake numbers in a letter? Well, there's a few issues. This is a federal cabinet minister using forged documents to write an official letter, and then, as we'll see, lying about it. But because it was also leaked to the Daily Telegraph, it allowed elements of the media to run with an invented narrative. It's all about distracting from the real issues. It allowed the coalition to get the media to say, "Look everyone, even those people who say they want more action on climate change are hypocrites and can't keep their own carbon footprint under control." And it worked. The story did its rounds and sounded something like this.
Clover Moore has been told to put her money where her mouth is when it comes to climate change. A few weeks after Clover wrote a letter to the government saying Australia is facing a climate emergency, the Energy Minister Angus Taylor has returned fire.
Straight after the Daily Telegraph published their article, Clover Moore raised the inaccuracies. But there was no correction from Angus Taylor. Having heard nothing from the minister for almost a month, Clover Moore went back to him with a formal response. In that letter, she told Angus Taylor that his figures were inaccurate, and gave him an opportunity to provide more information about where he got the figures from. How he responds throughout this whole thing is fascinating. It's a mixture of denial, distraction, and dishonesty. Angus Taylor was trying to ignore the whole thing, but that came to an end when in October 2019, The Guardian first started reporting the story that he had used potentially forged documents. That day didn't go well for the minister. First, he issued a statement to try and get ahead of the spreading story. Instead of apologising or explaining what happened, he doubled down on his ridiculous letter. He called the whole thing a conspiracy theory being perpetrated by the Lord Mayor, and said, "I make no apology for suggesting that the Lord Mayor should take real and meaningful action to reduce the City of Sydney's carbon emissions instead of hollow virtue signalling through letters." But if he thought that would be the end of it, he was wrong. Parliament was sitting that day, and Labor made good use of question time.
Will the Minister assure the House that this forgery was not made by him or his office?
The Minister has the call. The Minister for
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reduction.
Yes.
Where did the Minister get the forged document?
The Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I absolutely reject the premise of the question and the bizarre assertions being peddled by those opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is again to the Minister for Emissions Reduction, and I refer to his previous answer. Where did the Minister get the document?
The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The document was drawn directly from the City of Sydney's website. It was publicly available.
Does the minister stand by his claim that he downloaded the document from the City of Sydney's website in light of information released today by the City that metadata logs prove conclusively that the original documents had not been altered since being uploaded to their website almost 12 months ago?
The document was drawn from the City of Sydney website and it was publicly available. Now, I reject the bizarre suggestions and assertions being peddled by those opposite. Those opposite will believe anything they read on their favourite website, Mr Speaker. They are all smear and no idea.
The minister's claim that he got the fake documents from the City of Sydney website is laughable. Labor then attempted to pass a motion dealing with the issue, but was blocked by the government, who used gag motions to stop any further discussion.
We need to know whether the forgery was tailor-made, because it looks exactly like that.
Resume his seat. The Leader of the House has the call.
I move that the member no longer be heard.
The question is that the Manager of Opposition Business be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Is the motion seconded? The member for Hindmarsh.
Seconded. The public has a right to know about these crimes,
The
not
member for
have debate
Hindmarsh will
shut
resume
down
his
yet
seat.
again.
The Leader of the House.
The member be no longer heard.
The Leader of the House has moved the member for Hindmarsh be no further heard.
If you haven't heard of the gag motion before, check out this video that goes through it in detail. After getting no answers in Parliament, Labor told the Prime Minister to refer the matter to police for further investigation. Scott Morrison refused. The next day, Labor's Shadow Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, referred the matter to the New South Wales Police, saying that the article in The Guardian raised questions as to whether an offence had been committed. He asked the New South Wales Police to consider investigating. As the New South Wales Police were deciding whether to open an investigation, Angus Taylor started to backpedal. He sent an apology letter to Clover Moore, saying, "It is now clear to me that the correspondence I sent to you included numbers that were not correct. I regret not clarifying those figures with you before writing. I apologise unreservedly." But despite this, he kept saying that the fake documents he relied on was from the council's own website. The problem was that more and more evidence was showing that this wasn't possible. The council had already released metadata from its systems, showing that the annual reports had not been changed since they had been first uploaded, months before Angus Taylor apparently accessed them. But we can check this for ourselves. Archive websites on the internet record web pages at certain dates in the past, which allow you to go back in time. Checking the council's website, there is an archive from the 26th of June 2019, which is well before Angus Taylor says he accessed the site. At that time, the 2017-18 annual report was no different to what it is today. The numbers haven't changed. The site also hadn't been updated since 2018, in line with the council's metadata. What this means is that we have no idea where Angus Taylor's forged document came from. He had also most likely misled the Parliament when he said this.
The document was drawn directly from the City of Sydney's website. It was publicly available.
In November 2019, he was again asked about this in Parliament.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Emissions Reduction. When Parliament last sat, the Minister said in relation to his letter to the Sydney Lord Mayor, and I quote, "The document was drawn directly from the City of Sydney's website." Does the Minister now accept that he was misleading the Parliament?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I've already dealt with this and I'll table a copy of my statement from the 25th of October. Mr Speaker, now, Mr Speaker, Labor and their mates have an insatiable appetite for gossip and smear. Their hypocrisy knows no bounds. We won't be lectured to on integrity by the party, Mr Speaker, of Aldi bags and wine boxes full of cash. Now, Mr Speaker, I can advise the House that the Manager of Opposition Business over there wrote to me on Friday about my statement, the very same day that Eddie O'Beid was paroled, Mr Speaker. Now,
The Minister can pause for a second.
Putting aside his completely irrelevant answer, he said that he tabled a statement which is worth having a look at. That statement was his official response to this matter, and in it he says that the accusations are outrageous, and that he rejects absolutely the suggestion that he or any of his staff altered any documents. He then says there is clear evidence that there are different versions of the report on the council's website, including draft documents. Attached to the statement was evidence which he said proved this point. This should clear everything up. Except it doesn't. The first point he tries to make is that the website has two versions of the report. One is a PDF file and the other is a Word document. His logic is that because of this, maybe other versions existed as well that had the fake numbers. But these aren't different versions. They're the same document provided in two file types. This is pretty common. In fact, here is the government itself doing the same thing with its public release of its weak and ineffective proposed federal ICAC. So then he tries to say, well, the two file types have different formatting and font, so somehow that shows that the numbers could also have been different. It's not helpful that he provides some low resolution screenshots, and that his own examples don't show any different numbers. But when I went and compared the same documents on my computer, I didn't find any of the same formatting issues. For example, here is what he said one of the headings look like in the Word document. The letter S at the end gets cut off and is apparently on a different line. But here is what it looked like for me, and it happens to be exactly the same as the PDF file he's comparing to, as well as the forged document. And that's all the evidence he provided. What a sad attempt to cover things up. Obviously no one was convinced by this, and the New South Wales Police announced that the Financial Crime Squad would launch an investigation into Angus Taylor, called Strike Force Garrett. This meant that Scott Morrison was forced to respond, and we know how that usually ends up. When a minister is under investigation, there are ministerial standards, released by Scott Morrison himself, which outline how the minister will be dealt with. Clause 7.1 says that the Prime Minister decides whether a minister should stand aside if they become subject to an official investigation. It's pretty vague, and leaves the decision up to a person I wouldn't use the word integrity to describe. As an interesting side note, the ministerial standards on the Prime Minister's website also had both a PDF and Word document available for download. Once the investigation is announced, Scott Morrison was then repeatedly asked in Parliament about how he will act in line with the ministerial standards.
The Ministerial Code makes it the personal responsibility of the Prime Minister to decide whether to stand aside a minister in the exact circumstances that the Minister for Emissions Reduction now finds himself in. Prime Minister, the New South Wales Police have established Strike Force Garrett into the potential criminal behaviour of a minister sitting on your front bench right now. Prime Minister, why is he still sitting there? When will you stand
the Leader of the Opposition's
aside?
time has concluded. The Prime Minister has the call.
The matters that the opposition leader refers to have not been provided to me or be presented to me by the New South Wales Police. I have not been advised of those developments, Mr Speaker, and so I think that deals with the issues that he has raised in relation to the code. But, Mr Speaker, can I say about the Minister for Energy and the Minister for Emissions Reduction, I think I can understand why those opposite have taken such a keen interest in him, Mr Speaker, because he's responsible for policies that we are finally starting to see.
Angus Taylor also doesn't miss his chance to keep misleading Parliament.
I reject absolutely the suggestion that I or any members of my staff altered the documents in question.
Labor then tries to move a motion, calling for the standing aside of Angus Taylor, but when trying to justify this to the Parliament, they again get shut down by gag motions.
Calls on the Prime Minister to do what only he can under the ministerial standards and immediately stand the Minister for Emissions Reduction down. Mr Speaker, the fact is they don't like scrutiny.
The Leader of the Opposition resume his seat. The Leader of the House. The Leader of the House has moved that the Leader of the Opposition be no further heard. All those of that opinion.
They don't like scrutiny, not by the media, not even by the police, and certainly not by the
Opposition
Parliament.
Business will resume his seat. The Leader of the House.
I move that the member no longer be heard.
Scott Morrison later provided an update on his decision under the ministerial standards.
Coming back to the House, in question time today, I undertook to make contact with the New South Wales Police to inform myself on the matters that were the subject of the questions raised by the Leader of the Opposition regarding the Statement of Ministerial Standards, specifically Clause 7.1 and 7.2. I take matters of ministerial standards very seriously. I have since spoken with the New South Wales Police Commissioner, Mick Fuller, about the instigation, the nature and substance of their inquiries, which he advised me were based only on the allegations referred by the Shadow Attorney General, and based on the information provided to me by the Commissioner, I consider there is no action required by me under clauses 7 stop 1
Members on my left
and 7 stop 2. The New South Wales Police should now be left to complete their inquiries, which will be considered upon their completion.
Members on my left, the Leader of the Opposition.
When asked about this phone call, the New South Wales Police Commissioner Mick Fuller said it was an extremely short conversation in that he just wanted confirmation we were conducting an investigation. Which doesn't make sense, because the police had already put out a very clear statement saying that there was an investigation and that no further information was available. The phone call was also labelled as inappropriate by integrity experts. This is especially the case given their history together.
He is the New South Wales Police Commissioner Mick Fuller. He's in the studio right now. Commissioner, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ben.
Once upon a time when Scott Morrison, the now Prime Minister, was one of your neighbours, he used to collect your bins. If the bins were left out and they hadn't been taken in by you, the bloke who's now the most powerful person in the country used to go and get the bins and take them in. He doesn't do it anymore for you. Is that true?
But he was the Treasurer at the time, and he did tell me recently that he's the Prime Minister now, and really that should be Josh Frydenberg's job. But he won't take my calls, so anyway, no, he's a neighbour of mine.
Well, he's moved out. He's in Kirribilli now, so he's not collecting your bins anymore.
And I do wish him well. He was a very good neighbour.
You have just been raised in a conversation with Mick Fuller.
Oh, yeah.
The New South Wales Police Commissioner.
Yeah, good bloke.
Because once upon a time when you were neighbours, according to the Commissioner, and I think that this has been confirmed, you used to bring his bin in. When he'd leave the bin outside, the wheelie bin outside, and he was too lazy himself to bring it in, you would collect his bin and wheel it in for him. True or false?
Well, mate, that's what good neighbours do. That's what they do. Mick's a great bloke, and that's the Shire way.
Now, bringing a bin in for your neighbour isn't a big deal, but the point is there's a potential conflict of interest given that they know each other. And former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull also questioned the call.
It is always critically important that in any police inquiry, particularly something that involves a politician, that the police are and are seen to be acting entirely free of any political influence. It's a call, being blunt about it, it's a call that I would not have made.
Getting back to Labor's push for Angus Taylor to stand aside, while I get what they're saying, there's been too much focus on this in Parliament and in the media. Should a minister stand aside as soon as there is any allegation against them? Maybe not. Both sides have had to deal with this issue in the past. Scott Morrison tried to make this same point, but unfortunately for him, he threw in another lie because facts and the truth don't matter anymore.
Why is it, Mr. Speaker, that the former Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, and I refer to March 2013, Ross Mitchell, a detective in Victoria's Police Fraud Squad, stated that Prime Minister Julia Gillard was under investigation over her role in the creation of an AW slush fund. Let me make it perfectly clear, he said, the Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, is under investigation by police.
Members on my right.
The Prime Minister obviously didn't stand aside in relation to those matters. I remember the press conference, Mr. Speaker.
After it was revealed that he was misquoting, he then had to quietly correct the record. My point here is that the most important thing is that a proper investigation is done. And as we'll see, there was no proper investigation of Angus Taylor. The New South Wales Police looked into the matter for about 3 weeks. Responses the police provided to the New South Wales Parliament gave some good insight into the investigation. It found that the metadata didn't show any evidence of the document being downloaded by Angus Taylor's office. When asked if the police had found any evidence of the forged document ever existing on the council's website, as Angus Taylor was claiming, the answer was no. The police were also asked if they had requested an interview with Angus Taylor, which they had, but for some reason the minister was never interviewed. At some point there was a recommendation that the matter be referred to the Australian Federal Police because of jurisdictional issues. The New South Wales Police made the conclusion that it was determined the document in question was altered from the original that was published on the City of Sydney website. In December 2019, the referral was made to the AFP, with the New South Wales Police saying that it is clear that if any offence has been committed by any person, it is most likely to have occurred in the Australian Capital Territory. The AFP rejected the referral and decided not to investigate. Freedom of information requests forced the release of documents from both the AFP and the department, but a lot of it was blacked out. I mean pages and pages of redactions. But there were some interesting things left for the public to see. There was an AFP document from when the referral had been received, and the case prioritisation model noted the priority as essential, the impact as high, and estimated the investigation would take 3 to 6 months. Despite this, the referral was still rejected. The AFP's reasons were that it had determined it was unlikely further investigation would result in the obtaining of admissible evidence, and that the public interest in this matter was insufficient. So apparently, the AFP thought that investigating whether one of the most senior politicians in the country had engaged in fraud was of insufficient public interest. The coalition jumped at this news and tried to make it look like the police had investigated and found no wrongdoing.
The AFP identified there is no evidence to indicate that you, the Minister for Energy, were involved in falsifying information. No evidence that you were involved in falsifying information.
The reality, of course, was that the New South Wales Police confirmed that Angus Taylor's document was a forgery and referred it to the AFP, who then refused to investigate. Angus Taylor also had some words to say on ABC's 7:30.
Do you still maintain that the falsified document that your office distributed about the Sydney City Council's travel bill came from its own website?
Yes. I mean, my statement on this was clear from the start.
But can I just... Sorry, can I...
Lee,
OK, sorry, go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
I'd add to that, this has been considered and closed by 2 independent police forces, and we had the AFP Commissioner today saying the matter is finalised, full stop.
Given that what happened damaged your reputation, it brought the government into disrepute, you had to apologise over it, you must be disappointed at the lack of a thorough investigation.
Lee, 2 police forces have looked at this. It's been pretty thorough, and it went over months.
They didn't interview you. They didn't interview the Lord Mayor.
Well, that was a choice they made, but it's very clear what the position is here. The Commissioner has been very clear on it. He was very clear it's been finalised and the matter is closed, full stop.
I keep coming back to this. Why aren't you worried about it? You are the person who is the face of it. You are at the front line of it. Why aren't you worried about it?
Yeah, because I've made a very clear statement on it. I absolutely stand by that statement. 2 police forces have looked at it. The matter's closed. Now it's time to get on with it, Lee.
I think that interview raises good points. If I signed a letter based on a forged document, I'd want to get to the bottom of how those figures came about and how my reputation had been trashed as a result. He also said that there had been a thorough investigation and quoted the AFP Commissioner saying that the matter was finalised, full stop. What he was referring to was the AFP's appearance at Senate estimates, where the Commissioner was unable to answer many of the questions put to him about the investigation.
Did the Australian Federal Police interview the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore, as part of its assessment?
I'm not aware. To 100% confirm that, I'll take that on notice, but I'm not aware that the Mayor was interviewed. I've actually got a new system here, so I've just been told that no, the Mayor was not interviewed.
The Lord Mayor was not interviewed by the AFP.
Did the AFP interview Mr Taylor as part of this investigation?
No.
Why not?
Well, again, it goes back to those are decisions made by the Sensitive Investigations Board and those senior officers and the Deputy Commissioner. There was no need to, in their view, at that stage. It was about making sure that we're spending our money wisely, taxpayers' money on pursuing criminals.
Yes, but you don't know whether Mr Taylor behaved criminally or not because he didn't complete an investigation.
Well, I think I've been clear. The letter states that there is no criminality on Minister Taylor's behalf.
No, it doesn't actually. It says there's no evidence.
Well, that suggests one isn't a criminal, Senator McKim.
No, it doesn't. Actually,
if there's no evidence,
Chair.
you're not a criminal.
Chair, well, I'm asking the Commissioner, and Commissioner, I just draw your attention to that letter to Mr Dreyfus from Mr McCartney, the Deputy Commissioner, on the 6th of February. It doesn't clear Mr Taylor at all. It says that the AFP has identified there is no evidence to indicate Mr Taylor was involved in falsifying information, yet you didn't even ring him up and ask him if he'd done it. I mean, what sort of an investigation? Isn't that the first thing you'd do?
No, we don't operate like that. And I think that's really important that we don't go around asking everyone who perhaps is not involved in the matter, did you do it?
Well, in fact, information was falsified here, Commissioner, was it not?
Sorry?
Information was falsified in a letter that Mr Taylor signed. That's a fact, is it not?
Well, that's on the surface, reasonable suspicion.
So you've got false information in a letter signed personally by Mr Taylor. In what investigative plan would you not simply ring the person that it is alleged has done this and ask them about it? And again, it would take nearly no resources of the AFP, a very relatively small amount of resources for the AFP to do that, would it not?
I think we've...
Senator McKim, but I'm not sure that the Commissioner is going to take your advice on its investigative processes.
Well, I'm not offering advice on investigative processes,
you are,
Minister.
actually.
I'm asking questions about investigative
actually.
processes.
I think again, it's in the letter, we've acknowledged the apology.
Did you find any evidence that the draft version that Minister Taylor asserts had the 1.7 and 14.2 figures ever existed on the City of Sydney website?
I'll take that on notice, Senator.
When witnesses say they'll take a question on notice, it means they'll respond back in writing at a later date. The answer that was provided was that no evidence about this was obtained.
Did the AFP form a view of the documents Minister Taylor or his office provided to the Daily Telegraph were a forgery?
Again, I'm going to take that on notice. Thanks.
The AFP had formed no concluded view on this.
Did the AFP interview Minister Taylor's staff?
I'll take that on notice.
The AFP didn't make these inquiries.
Thank you. The matter is finalised. Full stop.
After numerous complaints were lodged about the AFP's decision, the Commonwealth Ombudsman decided to launch an investigation into whether rejecting the referral was appropriate. The Commonwealth Ombudsman looks into complaints about a number of federal agencies, including the AFP. It released its report in November 2020, and it found that the AFP formed the view that significant resources would have been required to investigate the matter. The Ombudsman also said that harm to the public's trust in government was not specifically considered, and that the AFP could have spoken with Angus Taylor or his office to determine whether a potential offence had occurred. Ultimately, the AFP's decision not to investigate this matter meant that the source of the incorrect figures was not and has not been determined. Despite this, the Ombudsman's recommendations were only that the AFP release a more detailed statement to the public, and that harm to the public's trust of institutions be considered in future matters. The AFP released its detailed statement, and in it had another reason why they hadn't investigated this matter. Because the seriousness of the allegations were on the lower end of the scale. It said its focus is on more serious offences, like war crimes, child exploitation, and serious fraud and drug matters. This is similar to the evidence they gave in the Senate.
Given that you are dealing with child exploitation, terrorism, major fraud, is this the kind of matter we should be applying the AFP's resources to?
I think what's clear is that we're focusing on those crime types that I said in my opening statement around organised crime, counter-terrorism, preventing harm from our community as in physical harm, and that's a priority of ours.
There's no doubt that the AFP investigates really serious matters, but the reality is it also finds time to go after whistleblowers and journalists. In recent years, the AFP has gone after Richard Boyle, who exposed misconduct at the ATO, David McBride and the journalists who helped him expose war crimes, the whistleblower who revealed allegations of misconduct in Parliament House by coalition politicians and their staff, and the Border Force employee who revealed dodgy immigration decisions by Peter Dutton. There are numerous examples. But with Angus Taylor and his forged documents, there apparently just wasn't enough time to investigate. Politicians, especially the coalition, love to say that the current arrangements are working when it comes to investigating misconduct and corruption.
There are 11 different highly motivated and highly resourced agencies that look into issues of integrity, criminal offending and corruption across the public sector at the moment.
There are already significant integrity measures in the system, like Senate estimates and the Auditor General Department and all these sort of things which already exist, which are quite strong.
This is total rubbish. The Angus Taylor scandal shows exactly why the AFP isn't the right organisation to deal with these kinds of things. There needs to be an effective and powerful federal anti-corruption commission, because what we have now doesn't protect public trust in our institutions. As for Angus Taylor, that was the end of the matter. As he would say, like that time he commented on his own social media post without switching to his fake account first, fantastic, great move, well done Angus. If you made it to the end, then thank you. These videos take ages to make, and right now I'm a one-man show. If you'd like to help support this channel grow, consider checking out my Patreon page. Links are in the description below.